The Conservative Party repeatedly broke the law by failing to properly declare its election expenses during the last general election. That's the categorical and damning finding of a year-long investigation by the Electoral Commission, the official body charged with regulating political parties and elections. It follows a long-running investigation by Channel 4 News, which uncovered hundreds of thousands of pounds of improperly declared spending by the Conservative Party in 3 by-elections in 2014 and in the 2015 general election. Today, Theresa May went on television to insist we have complied fully with the Commission's inquiries. However, on page 10 of this report, the Commission notes the party did not cooperate fully. The Crown Prosecution Service is now examining evidence gathered by 12 police forces across the country, covering dozens of sitting MPs. Michael Crick has this.
Lasting more than 12 months, this inquiry into Conservative election spending is the biggest the Electoral Commission has ever mounted. An inquiry prompted directly by investigations broadcast by this programme in the early part of last year. Today, the Commission delivered its verdict, and it's damning. It finds in the clearest terms possible that the Conservatives broke election law by failing properly to declare their election expenses. They've been given a record fine, and the report also finds that the former Treasurer and Chief Executive broke the law on multiple occasions. He may also have committed a criminal offence by knowingly or recklessly making a false declaration. And it's been referred to the Metropolitan Police. The fine levied by the Electoral Commission was £70,000, hardly likely to bankrupt the party. £70,000 isn't much for the Conservative Party. I mean, they spent more than that on 2 hotels in the Rochester by-election.
No. I mean, it is something that we are concerned about, and it's something that we have now repeatedly called for, because that £70,000 is made up of a number of fines, and in fact the maximum single fine we can impose is just £20,000. And we think that big parties or those campaigning in big elections may well just see that as a cost of doing business.
This isn't business though, it's democracy. And the story began with 3 big by-elections in 2014, where UKIP hoped to get its first MPs. In Clacton, Rochester and earlier Newark, where I actually raised expenses with the winning Tory MP. Liberal Democrats estimates you spent £250,000.
Well, look, I've no idea where that came from. I'm certain the party stayed within the legal limits.
Last year, we obtained bills showing that across those 3 by-elections, the Tories spent more than £80,000 for staff to stay in hotels.
The Commission is satisfied,
they say,
that the entire accommodation costs for staff and volunteers were incurred to facilitate those individuals' work on the respective by-election campaigns.
So they say most of those costs should have been included on the candidates' local spending returns. But that might well have put them over the legal spending limit. Then, after the general election in South Thanet, we spotted the Tories had declared as a cost for their national campaign £14,000 for party bigwigs at the Royal Harbour Hotel in Ramsgate.
McKinley, the Conservative Party candidate.
In the seat, where the Tory candidate Craig McKinley hoped to stop UKIP leader Nigel Farage becoming an MP.
Mr. Timothy, my name's Michael Crick. I'm from...
The Electoral Commission examined the role of 2 political advisers staying at the hotel. Nick Timothy, now Theresa May's Joint Chief of Staff, whom I encountered a couple of weeks back, and another of May's closest advisers in number 10, Stephen Parkinson. The Commission disagree with the Tory claim that Timothy and several of his colleagues were at the hotel working solely on the party's national campaign.
2 political advisers based in the Royal Harbour Hotel,
the report says,
in fact played key roles in determining Mr McKinley's campaign messages and in drafting campaign material promoting Mr McKinley's electoral success.
Some of those people who were staying in that hotel were clearly working directly on the local candidate's campaign and contributing to that, and those elements of their work should have been attributed to the local candidate's spending return, yes.
So the hotel room for Nick Timothy
and Stephen Parkinson, big advisors now to the Prime Minister, those should have been on Craig McKinley's campaign spending returns. And well, they weren't cheap, those rooms either.
I'm not
£100 a night or so.
I'm not commenting on the individuals involved, but certainly accommodation costs that were put into the national spending return, where the people were working on the local candidates campaign, we would have expected to see in that local candidate spending return, yes.
Similarly with the battle bus tours in the closing days of the 2015 campaign, ferrying scores of activists around marginal seats with rooms overnight in hotels, all at huge cost. While the Commission hasn't found evidence to suggest the battle bus project was intended to promote the election of individual candidates, they do say a proportion of the £100,000 plus battle bus costs should also have been included on local candidates' spending returns, as they clearly benefited from the tours. The Conservatives have always said they'd cooperate with the Electoral Commission.
He's legged it. He's walked off the other way. He said, come on.
Here's what we were told last year by Lord Feldman, the then co-chairman who helped centralise the party and is now partly blamed by some of the MPs under investigation.
We will, of course, do everything we can to cooperate with them and give them all the information that they need.
And today we heard much the same from Theresa May.
We have complied fully with the Electoral Commission throughout their investigations. They have imposed a fine on the Conservative Party, and the Conservative Party will be meeting that fine, will be paying that fine.
Complied fully? The Commission accused the party of unreasonable, uncooperative conduct. They say they had to apply for a High Court order at one point to force the Conservatives to produce the evidence they'd requested.
When we first asked for information, if we had had that and they had been able to provide it then, we probably would have been able to progress a lot more quickly and it would have been easier for everyone.
And you also say this involved extra expense to the public purse.
Well, those delays meant that we had to deploy more staff, we had to use our teams to in the notices and then to seek the court order. So yes, that does incur cost to the public purse.
The Conservatives said again today that local candidates correctly declared all their spending in 2015. The Electoral Commission have strongly suggested that's not true. And a dozen or more MPs face the possibility of being disqualified, as the Crown Prosecution Service has about 10 weeks to consider police findings on the matter.
And Michael Crick is with me now. Michael, what next?
Well, the Conservative Party is still under huge pressure on this issue. That was illustrated today when a Sky reporter, Darren McCaffrey, came across the Conservative chairman, Patrick McLaughlin, and tried to ask him questions and film it on his iPhone. And Mr. McLaughlin tried to grab his iPhone away from him and refused to answer any questions. The essential upshot of today's report is the Electoral Commission think and say that in South Thanet and in the battle bus constituencies, the 24 or so of them, the local spending returns were under-declared. Now, that is serious stuff. And of course, that is what the police have been looking at. We heard yesterday how police forces in a dozen places have now sent files of evidence to the Crown Prosecution Service. Now, a lot of those files of evidence won't just be about one MP, but two, or in one or two cases, perhaps three MPs. And we're also still awaiting news from what's happening in about 4 other police forces. Cheshire said today that they didn't think any criminal offences had occurred in the 2 constituencies they were looking at. The Crown Prosecution Service now has about 10 weeks to decide when to prosecute. There is a time limit on this, and I imagine we will hear about that sometime around about the beginning of sometime in May.
Michael Crick, thank you. To the eye of the storm now, the place thought most likely to face a by-election as a result of the expenses investigations is South Thanet, where the Tories went all out during the 2015 general election to deny UKIP leader Nigel Farage a seat in Parliament. Craig McKinley, the man who did win South Thanet for the Conservatives, has been questioned under caution by Kent Police over whether he correctly declared all the money spent on re-electing him. Porrick O'Brien has been trying to grab a word.
A whistle-stop coastal tour to assess the fallout of the election expenses investigation in some of the places where it matters most. First stop, Chatham in Kent, where Craig McKinley MP lives. He was interviewed by police last week.
Is Craig in?
Who is calling?
It's Channel 4 News here.
He did not want to be interviewed by us.
Could I have a quick chat with him?
The Conservative MP beat UKIP's big gun Nigel Farage last year to win in the neighbouring constituency of South Thanet, a campaign at the centre of the Electoral Commission's report today. Perhaps it was just chance, but for those on the waterfront we met, this is about something far bigger than administrative minutiae.
If we've got a democracy and the rules are laid down, you've got to abide by the rules, haven't you? And if you don't, you're cheating. That's it.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter what it is. Cheating's cheating, and they were.
Does it matter to you?
Well, it does, partly because the election was so close. So, you know, there could be an allegation, I guess, that someone had an unfair advantage because they weren't playing by the rules.
Craig McKinley has stuck to the line that people sent here by Conservative HQ were part of the national campaign and not working under his campaign umbrella. The Electoral Commission report, though, talks about correspondence that paints a different picture. For example, people like Marion Little parachuted in. In other correspondence, the report goes on, McKinley refers to her as the campaign coordinator. And in still further correspondence, she, this senior advisor sent down by Conservative HQ, advises a volunteer, and I quote, "We are running Craig's campaign." The fines imposed by the Electoral Commission relate to national spending returns. Important to stress that the Conservatives reiterated today that local agents correctly declared local spending.
I said, as this campaign went on, that if I didn't win, I would stand down as leader of UKIP.
So next stop, this piece of coast just outside Margate, where famously Nigel Farage gave his resignation speech after the last general election. And word has just come through today that UKIP are opening the process by which they nominate a candidate in case of a snap general election or a by-election here. We've organised to meet one of the people that'll be throwing his hat into the ring. Are you tempted?
Tempted? I think so. I think probably local candidates will do very well down here. We certainly, even allowing for the fact of what happened at the general election when Nigel was cheated out of his seat, you know, we won the district council anyway. So
is
we've
that
got
how you see it, cheated out of his seat?
I don't think there's much doubt about it now, is there?
And that is how UKIP's support base here feel, cheated, but also acknowledgement that the next stage is crucial.
Up to the police to find out whether it was done deliberate or not.
It's got to be found out and proven.
If it's definitely deliberate, definitely another election.
For the people we met, at least, a sense that this latest episode just further erodes faith in politics.
Porrick O'Brien in Thanet South. Well, I'm joined now by Gavin Miller QC. He's an expert in election law, and from Cardiff I'll be joined in a moment by John Strafford, who is the chairman of the Campaign for Conservative Democracy. Gavin Miller, CPS now have at least 12 police authorities reports on, we don't know how many candidates, but at least 12, probably more. What will they be doing?
Well, they'll be looking at what the police have been able to tell them by way of evidence about what services were provided in those constituencies to the candidates, what the people did, what the candidates knew about it, what they discussed with the Conservative Party nationally about what that meant in terms of their own expenses, and how credibly they can claim not to have appreciated that there would be an election expense for them to declare in relation to their local campaigning.
Well, now, a number of these MPs actually met with the Conservative authorities during the week and complained that they had been told that these battle buses and all the rest of it would be dealt with on the national budget. They would only have to pay for the literature. Is that a defence?
No, it's not a defence, not a complete... Look, the law has always put the onus on the candidate and the agent to put in an accurate return and to be honest about their belief that it's an accurate return. It's a fundamental of our system. that the local candidate and agent does that. It's a worrying state of affairs if you could simply avoid any potential liability by saying, well, the local party told me this. You've got to exercise your own judgment.
The sums of money are enormous. I mean, tens of thousands of pounds for hotel rooms, for all sorts of, for the battle buses themselves and the rest of it. I mean, £15,000 doesn't go very far. It must be pretty obvious to a judge where the truth lies.
Well, it should be pretty obvious to a candidate and agent. If you get 50 people turning up on an expensive bus, having been put up overnight, to do leafleting and canvassing in your constituency that day, at least you've got to ask yourself, what about the cost of all this?
Well, now, the important thing is that the last case you actually had to handle as a lawyer, which was that of the MP who was accused of doing the same thing and, in fact, had her seat taken away from her, but was not jailed.
Yes, that's right.
And so jail is not inevitable for these MPs.
No, the judge in that case took the view that losing the seat publicly
was
and
a bad
being
enough
embarrassed
punishment.
like that was a bad enough punishment on its own.
Well, now, Mr. Stafford, can we talk to you now? Because you are an activist. You're somebody who does all that envelope stuffing and you sort of run this democracy idea inside the party. How do you view what has happened?
Well, in the words of Laurel and Hardy, it's another fine mess. It's quite appalling that we've got into this situation. I feel very sympathetic to the candidates who are involved in all this, because my experience is that once central office moves into a constituency, they effectively take control, and the candidates really don't have a great deal of say in the matter. And the problem is that within the Conservative Party, there's no democratic accountability. So that those people that ought to be checking these items out, like the party chairman, the party treasurer, they're appointed people. They're not elected by the members. They're not accountable to the members. And that means that they don't have to turn up at an annual general meeting and present a report and be questioned on their activities. And that goes to the heart of the problem.
Isn't also the heart of the problem that these campaigns have become very, very national, that basically it's a very centralised party with, in some constituencies, really remarkably few members to fight an election?
Well, it's become centralised because the number of members that the Conservative Party has got and the other parties has diminished so rapidly. From 3.2 million in 1951, we're down to not much more than 100,000. You cannot run a ground campaign with that number of members because only about 10% of them are active. You know, if you were trying to run a national campaign with 10,000 members, you wouldn't even be able to man all the polling stations, let alone get people out to vote.
But one thing,
until something is done about improving the membership.
Yeah, but
Sorry,
one thing you'll know, Mr. Stafford, is that they're very good at raising money, particularly from the city and elsewhere. They've got a lot of money, and the question has to be asked in the end: have they simply bought themselves victory?
Well, money's bedeviled politics for a very long time, and it's time that we all brought in a cap on donations of about £5,000. And if we did that, well, then the parties would have to depend on look to their members to get their support in a ground campaign. It's because of all this money flushing around the system that they're able to spend large sums of money on what often are just wasteful things.
Mr. Stafford, thank you. And just a final thought from you, Gavin Miller. Is this a big enough shock to the system to get a decently empowered electoral commission that can really... They've complained they can't fine these people any more than they have. They complain they can't investigate as much as they'd like to.
It is, and what we should have is representatives in the key seats of the Electoral Commission, like local police officers or enforcement officers, during the election to see who's there, who's doing what, how much it's costing, so that that's all known about when the return is filed. So if it looks wrong to the people who know.